Okay, so I'm going to do my ethical philosopher profile presentation. I'm doing it on Soren Kierkegaard, Revelation and Ethics. So I'm to do a brief biographical sketch, which I'm not doing a sketch as in drawing, but I'm just saying a little bit about him. And to start out, I'm very computer illiterate, so we'll see how this goes. Anyway, Soren Kierkegaard, he was a 19th century Danish philosopher. His occupation was a theologian, philosopher, critic, and a writer. He was born on May 5th, 1813. He died on November 11th, 1855, which November 11th is my birthday, but of course not the same year. He was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, and died in the same place. He only lived 42 and a half years. He went on to study to be a philosopher while publishing books like Either Or, Stages on Life's Way, Works of Love, and I'm just going to show you a picture of him. Here's a picture of him. Soren Kierkegaard. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, he didn't agree with a lot of the dominant Christian ideology, however you say that, at that time, and took on ideological explorations, and there birthed existentialism. I'm not sure how to pronounce that exactly either. He came against the writings, philosophies, ecclesiastical establishments of his day for misrepresenting the greatest task of human existence, namely being yourself in an ethical and religious sense. He was considered somewhat uneventful, but to the contrary, 4 overlapping acts, crisis, collision. His father was prosperous. He was a retired businessman, a man of deep but gloomy, guilt-ridden piety, or piety again, I don't know how to pronounce that. His father once cursed God as a boy, and he started his family by getting his maid pregnant and marrying her soon after his first wife died. I believe there was 7 children, and Soren was the youngest. But Soren's dad's domineering presence stimulated him in his younger days and in his imaginative and intellectual gift, not having a normal childhood. He enrolled at the University of Copenhagen in 1830, but didn't finish until 1841. He was one of the great Christian theological thinkers from the past 200 years. His philosophy contradicted the ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas, who tried to balance faith and reason, but he insisted that faith and reason were completely separate from each other. So this is a description of his philosophies, kind of ethical systems. He was considered the father of existentialism, if that's the way you pronounce it. An existentialism is a philosophical theory or approach that emphasizes the existence of the individual person as a free and responsible agent determining their own development through acts of the will. Not really easy for me to understand, but anyway, another definition was of existentialism is a philosophy that emphasizes individual existence, freedom, and choice. It is a view that humans divine their own meaning in life and try to make rational decisions despite existing in an irrational universe. Also called the philosophical school of thought. Soren also reacted directly to G.W.F. Hegel, or I'm not sure how you say that, German idealism that dominated most of the European philosophical thought at that time. He wasn't like the majority of philosophers, in that Kierkegaard did not place emphasis on the idea of obtaining objective truths about reality, but was asking about human beings' value and how they should live their lives. His approach was somewhat like that of Socrates and Plato's dialogue. He didn't necessarily try to convince or argue particularly, but to present ideas to encourage readers to evaluate the ideas and recognize what kind of person might benefit from these ideas. Scholars have pretty much separated his beliefs into three spheres of existence: aesthetic fear, ethical fear, and finally the religious sphere. The aesthetic fear was living life primarily concerned with the way things look, with pleasure and essentially hedonistic, which is like the pursuit of pleasure, sensually self-indulgent. Ethical sphere, where an individual starts to take responsibility for him or herself, where good and evil begins to take hold, the idea of responsibility for each other. And finally is the religious sphere, which Kierkegaard holds highest of all. He feels the ethical sphere is an important part of human development, but feels it's through a personal relationship with God that we achieve our highest purpose. The ethical gives humans an idea of the moral absolute. Human reason is not enough in Kierkegaard's view. He believes that we need to be aware of our sinfulness and transcends to a higher power. He had writings on the Night of Faith. It's called the Night, K-N-I-G-H-T, of Faith. It's expressed in his book Fear and Trembling, and probably the most discussed concept in Kierkegaard's philosophy. This guy, Johannes de Silentio, examines the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac and is an unbeliever. Johannes de Silentio, however you pronounce his name, and he's an unbeliever. He thinks if Abraham would have killed Isaac to please God, it would be a monstrous act. But Kierkegaard's point is, if we truly believe what God says in his word, it doesn't have to make sense to us. His beliefs also contradicts reason with faith. Even if we don't believe what God is asking us to do is reasonable, if we claim to be true Christians, we should do it. Of course, God knows best. So it's also asking for examples of how it works in contemporary life. I guess I would say that an example of how Kierkegaard's ethical system works in contemporary life would be when our government really searches for God's way. If and when our government would really searches for God's way to do things, the country runs better. Of course, God knows best again. If we can just hear his voice and obey his commands, even if it doesn't make sense to our human minds, he, God, knows the end and outcome. I believe also that even in our everyday lives, if we would draw closer to God and have a very personal relationship with him, our lives would go better also, as an example of how it would work or does work in contemporary life. If we could draw closer to God and have a very personal relationship with him, our lives would go better also. Kierkegaard's system seems to work because he believes we are all responsible for our own actions and we have a free will. We need direction, and how can we have direction without a guide? The Bible has every answer we need for every situation we have and are in. If we used God's commandments and laws to govern our lives, government, friendships, marriages, relationships, in general, even activities we're in, sports, communications, etc., 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 I think we'd be surprised how everything would fall into perfect order. So again, the way it works in contemporary life is that if we listen and learn from those who know and do biblical teachings, we would benefit greatly in many ways. Although you ask, how does Kierkegaard's ethical system work in contemporary life, it is hard to come up with a conclusion. The majority of people in this world today do not believe in his system and choose to do things their own way. So my general critique is that you ask, what is the best thing about this system? Existentialism is, again, a philosophy that emphasizes individual existence, freedom, and choice. It is the view that humans define their own meaning in life and try to make rational decisions despite existing in an irrational universe. I believe this to be true, if I'm understanding it correctly. We are responsible for our own actions. We have free will and don't have to do everything the world is doing just because it's the world. And the world is a majority. The worst thing I'd say about this system, I don't see in my readings of his a bad thing, only that he was depressed at times, and I wonder where that came from. But also, I don't believe he ever married, and not sure if not experiencing that, he can view life completely to come up with his theories. Because I think experience is the greatest teacher, but he was engaged, I know, somewhere along the line for quite a long time, and doesn't say exactly what that caused his breakup. But anyway, and then it says, what are some of the consequences if one adopted the theory unilaterally? Well, I think if everyone believed as he did, biblically speaking, I think the consequences would be great. As I said before, life would just fall into place. I also agree with his saying we need a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and to use him as an example to live by. Do I agree? Why and why not? I do agree. I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ myself. He changed my life tremendously. When I believed in some of these other theories, like do whatever I want, no consequences for my actions, if it feels good, do it, my life fell apart horribly, enough that I wanted to take my own life. When I finally surrendered my life to God, he gave me reason, purpose, and a desire to live. His grace was sufficient. He forgave and still forgives my sinful life, my sin-filled life. He draws me closer to him when I ask. I crave his word and long to be more like him, to be more like Jesus. I believe Kierkegaard had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and God taught him well. And here's my sources. I'm not sure if this will work for I'll have to do a screenshot too and see if I can. That's not going to work, is it? Anyway, I'll put that on there later. Thank you.